Hello, thank you for joining this week's Washington Talk. I'm Ji Ha-ham. The South Korean government proposed an audacious initiative to provide economic compensation to North Korea in exchange for its nuclear weapons program, while the US and South Korea launched preliminary drills ahead of the upcoming annual joint exercise Ulchi Freedom Shield. North Korea this week fired 2 cruise missiles. Today we'll discuss these and more.
실질적인 비핵화로 전환한다면 그 단계에 맞춰 북한의 경제와 민생을 획기적으로 개선할 수 있는 담대한 구상을 지금 이 자리에서 제안합니다.
We will continue to maintain those sanctions until and unless the underlying conduct, the underlying activity changes and North Korea alters its fundamental approach.
In the studio with me is Robert Rapson. Mr. Rapson retired from the State Department this past May after a distinguished 39-year career as a U.S. diplomat, a career that focused regionally on Korea, Japan, Southeast Asia, and India. His Korea experience is extensive, including assignment as Chargé d'Affaires and Deputy Chief of Mission at U.S. Embassy Seoul, and as Director for Korean Affairs at the State Department. Also joining me is Bruce Klingner, Senior Research Fellow for Northeast Asia at the Heritage Foundation's Asian Studies Center. Mr. Klingner served as CIA's Deputy Division Chief for Korea. Welcome to the show. Good to have you both today.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
In his Liberation Day speech, the South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol offered audacious economic assistance to North Korea. This new initiative is to entice North Korea to abandon its nuclear programs. Mr. Rapson, even though this is a fresh new plan that was laid by the Yoon government, this sounds very similar to the previous government's campaign on North Korea. What do you think?
Yeah, good question, Jia, and obviously one that's gotten a lot of attention in the Korean press and elsewhere. You know, the similarities of this new audacious plan with what may have come before. It certainly captured Kim Yo-jong's attention overnight, and that's something we can talk about a little bit later in the show. But you know, it's not surprising that there might be similarities between this policy announcement, the audacious initiative, with earlier policies such as Lee Myung-bak's Vision 3000. Some of the team that helped put together the LMB program are now working for Yoon Suk-yeol and his administration. So undoubtedly there's a commonality of interest and approach there. But you know, over 5 different Korean administrations going back as far as Kim Dae-jung, everyone's put their heads to the mat to figure out the best way to move forward with North Korea in terms of offering incentives or disincentives, sanctions. And no one's found the perfect solution yet. So let's see what the Yoon team's approach offers, and it's something we can obviously talk about as we head into our conversation.
Mr. Klingner, what makes this initiative so unique?
I'm not sure if it is unique, as Mr. Rapson's pointed out. Is if we delve into it, there might be some new, unique component of it. But you know, over the years, over the decades, really, U.S. and South Korean administrations have offered any lengthy list of benefits and delivered on many of them, all to no avail. North Korea continued its relentless pursuit of nuclear weapons and an arsenal of missiles to deliver them. So North Korea, as Kim Yo-jong just did again, but over the years has also said no amount of economic compensation will allay their security concerns, yet we keep trying to offer it as a way of inducing them back to negotiations.
As many had expected, Kim Yo-jong rejected the South Korea's offer. She said President Yoon displayed the height of absurdity. Mr. Rapson, do you think President Yoon intentionally offered something that North Korea wouldn't accept? Because some say the plan was for the local audience in Korea.
Well, at some level, of course, the audacious initiative was announced during the presidential campaign last year. So, of course, it was put out with some intention to appeal to voters, or at least to reach out to South Korean voters ahead of the election. But no, I can't believe that they'd put up an extensive program or proposal like this with the intent that it shouldn't go forward. Of course, the president's team needs to have a plan B in case the program or the initiative does stall, and what will they do, what should they do in the event that they don't get a positive reaction. And of course, we've gotten the initial reaction from Kim Yo-jong, and it's negative as expected. So the question is, what will the team do to maybe regroup, recalibrate, or proceed forth with laying out the details of the audacious initiative?
Mr. Klingner, this was expected.
We've seen a similar reaction from North Korea in the past, perhaps not as bombastic in its tone as Kim Yo-jong, but that seems to be her style. I think she's playing the bad cop to Kim Jong-un's good cop, or in a North Korean context, it's more bad cop and worse cop. But it's still something South Korea and the U.S. need to do, is to continue to seek dialogue, just having diplomats in a room, let alone formal negotiations. We also have to offer benefits. We're trying to get North Korea to give up their nuclear weapons. I think there's increasing pessimism that North Korea will ever do so, if they ever were going to do so. But it's something you do have to try, if nothing else, to show everyone that you are the logical partner. You're not the blockade to progress on the North Korean nuclear problem.
Many people thought President Yoon would be taking hardline approaches towards North Korea, but he seems to be somewhat flexible when it comes to North Korea. What do you think?
Well, I think hardline is a pejorative term, and if you say that he believes in enforcing UN resolutions and international law, he believes in implementing measures to deter or defend the existential threat to his people, if he's willing to have negotiations with a regime that threatens to incinerate Seoul and as well as very insulting to the leaders, I don't consider that hardline. I think that's pragmatic. But I think during the campaign he showed that he was willing to have diplomacy. He was willing to provide economic benefits. Where he differs from Moon Jae-in is that he was going to condition those benefits, as extensive as they may be, on progress towards denuclearization, and that puts him very much in line with the U.S. administration.
According to the South Korea's presidential office, the audacious initiative includes a program for exchanging South Korea's food supplies for North Korean resources, such as mineral sand and rare earth. Mr. Klingner, are we talking about easing sanctions?
We would have to be. There's no prohibition on providing food, medicine, or humanitarian assistance to North Korea, and every U.S. law and UN resolution specifically has carve-out language pointing out that that's not the case. However, any kind of joint venture or even barter deal with North Korea would violate UN resolutions, as the U.S. made clear to the Moon Jae-in administration when they thought that was a loophole they could use. So if there was any kind of deal, a barter deal, swap deal, that would be in violation of resolution. So it would require some kind of UN action.
What do you think? How realistic is this?
Well, as Bruce indicated, the sanctions regime is very comprehensive and detailed, and the Korean government, whether the Moon administration or now the Yoon administration, are clearly aware of the limits and the parameters of those sanctions. In fact, the sanctions regime is what limited the Moon Jae-in administration from proceeding and moving forward with some of the programs it was offering. So they'll have to look hard and fast as the details develop about the program and the proposal as to what's feasible or not. And of course, it requires, and I'm sure we'll see it, is continued close consultation, very close consultation and coordination with the U.S. administration on these plans as they develop.
The U.S. State Department said the U.S. strongly supports the South Korea's aim to open a path for diplomacy with North Korea. But at the same time, the department stressed that the U.S. will continue to maintain sanctions until North Korea alters its fundamental approaches. Mr. Rapson, are South Korea and the U.S. still on the same page?
Oh, sure. I mean, still on the same page. Yes, they've been on the same page. Certainly with the new administration, even I'd go back in many respects to the Moon Jae-in administration. We consulted and coordinated very closely. And, you know, where allies have slightly different views or opinions, we talk about those frankly, quietly, behind closed doors. And, you know, the hallmark of the Biden administration and certainly the Yoon Suk-yeol administration now is to strengthen this alliance, and that means strengthening that coordination. So we'll continue on that track. I don't see any inconsistencies with maintaining the firm sanctions regime, but still entertaining or considering the options for engaging in diplomacy. And that's been, again, the focus of U.S. diplomacy with respect to North Korea over the past 18 months of the Biden administration, is to be willing and open to talk with North Korea with no preconditions. And it's something, of course, we know that they haven't taken on.
Mr. Klingner, President Yoon said he just needs to see a firm determination towards denuclearization for his economic package. How can we prove or tell whether North Korea has a firm determination toward denuclearization?
Well, again, I think a lot of us are skeptical that it will, but you know, that's not to say we don't try for yet another international agreement. We've had 8 failed agreements. That's not to say we don't try for a 9th. As some would say, don't be afraid to go on a wild goose chase. That's what they make wild geese for. But I think it could be a series of steps. First, just simply being willing to sit in the same room as U.S. or South Korean diplomats would be a good start. Then if they were to agree to engage in negotiations, and then that's where you get into, you know, what steps does North Korea have to do in return for steps by the U.S. or the international community, and that's what negotiations are all about. But it's very hard to make any progress as long as North Korea refuses to even have dialogue. So if they were to commit to come back to the dialogue, and then if the next step would be sort of a seemingly sincerity in making progress towards working out which items would have to be done in incremental implementation towards denuclearization.
But let's say North Korea at some point, as you said, may show its willingness to denuclearize. But after all the benefits they take, they go back to their nuclear program. Is it easy for the international community to reverse its decision?
Well, the most important thing is we'd have to have a carefully crafted agreement, which we haven't had in the past with North Korea. They've always been very short with a lot of loopholes. And I look instead to the very extensive, very well-crafted arms control treaties we had with the Soviet Union. And I worked arms control for a while as a part of a negotiating delegation in Europe. We had very detailed conditions as to which all the players had to implement. We had very good verification measures. So we would need that in an agreement with North Korea. And because the benefits would be provided incrementally, if North Korea stopped doing something or went back, well, then the benefits would stop. You can also craft the economic benefits in a way where you had to automatically renew the provision of benefits, so that instead of having to get China or Russia to agree to reimpose sanctions, they simply snapped back because the approval wasn't given to continue them.
Mr. Rapson, for years, the U.S. and the international community have tried hard to end North Korea's nuclear program. Can we denuclearize North Korea?
Yeah, that's, as Americans would say, that's a $64,000 question, or maybe with inflation these days, $64 million question. But it gets to the core. Will North Korea denuclearize? Can it be incentivized to do that? So far, that proposition has not been proven out. The North Koreans seem to be in it for the long game. They have an attachment to their strategic assets, nuclear weapons and devices to deliver them, and continue to improve them as we talk. So, you know, I'm personally skeptical that they'll give up their nuclear weapons, no matter what the incentive to do so is, but that doesn't mean we can stop trying, and that's what diplomacy is about, is engaging, offering to engage, but at the same time negotiating and carrying forward on a diplomatic program from a position of strength. And that's what the current administration, the Yoon Suk-yeol administration, and the Biden administration are doing with the strengthening of the alliance.
Meanwhile, the United States and South Korea will resume their summertime military exercise, Ulchi Freedom Shield, next week. The two countries kicked off a 4-day preliminary drill, but in response, North Korea fired 2 cruise missiles. Mr. Rapson, can North Korea use this military exercise as a pretext of their provocation? And is this why North Korea launched the missile this week?
It's hard to tell exactly what is behind the decision making, but if we look at past practice over the many years and decades, this is not surprising. The launching of the 2 missiles, falls within this pattern of provocations over the last 6 or 7 months, but linked, I'm sure, to the President Yoon's announcement of the audacious initiative. North Korea doesn't need so much pretext to provocate, but I'm sure they're watching very carefully Ulchi Shield, because this is the largest exercise in over 6 years. And so I'm sure they'll take advantage of, exploit it to do what they have been doing, and they may even escalate. So this much predicted, much forecasted nuclear test is not out of the realm of possibility that they might go forward with it. But we'll see. We've been wrong before, at least over the last 6 months, on that forecast nuclear test.
Right. Mr. Klingner, you told us many times about the importance of the joint military exercise, but some people argue that North Korea did not conduct major weapons tests like ICBMs or nuclear after the U.S. made this decision. What do you think of that?
Well, the U.S. Unilaterally decided to cancel combined military exercises because President Trump thought they were ridiculous, worthless, and incredibly expensive, costing hundreds of millions of dollars, when the Pentagon said each exercise was about $14 million. So then once the U.S. had canceled a number of exercises, then when the Biden administration came in and wanted to resume exercises, the Moon administration was reluctant because they felt it would undermine Moon's initiative and outreach to North Korea. And then COVID was also a complicating factor. So military experts and senior military officers will say we have degraded the Allied deterrence and defense capability beginning with Trump's announcement in 2018. So it is something we need to do. Now, North Korea hasn't done a nuke test since 2017. They have done an ICBM test this year, but they're required by 11 UN resolutions not to do that. And they announced even before the U.S. summit in Singapore, U.S.-North Korea summit in Singapore, that they would not do them. So we didn't get anything in return for 4 years of degrading our military capabilities.
China also condemned the joint military exercise. Do you think China and North Korea also can strengthen their military cooperation or ties?
Well, North Korea has not stopped doing its own military exercises. And General Abrams, who was then commander on the peninsula at the time, said in 2019 their annual winter training cycle had 1 million soldiers involved. So we've canceled and curtailed and reduced our military exercises, at least 14 in the first year after Trump's announcement. North Korea has not stopped their action, and certainly they haven't stopped the continued development and deployment of a dozen or more short and medium range systems in the last few years.
The U.S. government still assesses the DPRK is preparing its 7th nuclear test. The spokesperson said that the U.S. is prepared to make both short and long-term adjustments to the military posture as appropriate. Mr. Rapson, what does this mean? Short-term and long-term adjustment to the military posture.
I think this came out in end May, early June. I think the National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan and Secretary of State raised it. It's an indication of the flexibility that the U.S. enjoys and will continue to deploy in terms of managing the situation on the Korean Peninsula, whether it's short-term tactical exercises, beefing them up, or if the situation warrants it, if the threat perception, the provocations mount to a certain level, the U.S. has the ability to move forces, deploy them out into the region on a longer term basis. I think it was left intentionally vague just to preserve that flexibility, but the message was clear. The U.S. has all options on the table, both locally, tactically, short-term, and longer-term as conditions warrant.
Mr. Klingner, your thoughts?
The short term would be actions we would do in response to a nuclear test, and we're sort of holding them in abeyance. So Presidents Biden and Yoon have agreed that we are going to resume the rotational deployment of U.S. strategic assets such as bomber overflights, carrier strike groups, dual capable aircraft. So we're going to do that anyway, but I think they're holding it back and holding it as a response to a nuclear test, as a show of strength and resolve. If North Korea continues to not do the nuclear test, we may end up doing the deployments anyway. The long-term developments would be really the continued improvement of South Korea's military, which Seoul has been working on for a number of years, devoted an extensive amount of the budget to the Defense Department, or their Ministry of Defense. They've made a lot of improvements. I hear a lot more compliments, a lot less criticisms from U.S. Alliance managers and military officers. The South Korean military is very impressive, and yet it does have to do long-term development in response to North Korea's long-term development of their missile and nuclear capabilities.
Mr. Rapson, if North Korea conducts a nuclear test, seventh nuclear test, how should the international community to respond?
Yeah, if a test, when a test, sooner or later, of course that will trigger all the mechanisms in our government, the U.S. government, as well as in Korea and the international community, or most of it, to be responsive to that. Action will center up in the UN, at the UN Security Council, but of course, over the past couple of years, willingness of the key Security Council members, China and Russia, to respond, to take action, further actions against North Korea. We haven't seen any signs of that. So the prospects of further resolutions directed at a nuclear test seem rather limited at this point. We'll have to see. But short of that, the international community, partners, like-minded countries, US, Korea, others in the region, I'm sure will rise to the occasion and do what's necessary, both rhetorically as well as physically, substantially, to show deep concern about a nuclear test at this time.
Mr. Klingner, the LG Freedom Shield will take place until early next month. Should we expect North Korea to do something provocative?
We should always expect North Korea to do something provocative. So it's really, what will they do as opposed to when will they do it or why will they do it. The what is more important than the when and the why. So they will do things such as missile launches or nuclear tests for developmental purposes, but then they may hold the timing of them and to use as a signal to the United States or the international community. So when they do a nuclear test, we thought they were going to do it on major anniversaries in Korea in April. Then we thought they were going to do it during Biden's trip, then perhaps Pelosi's trip, and now maybe because of the military exercises. So we just really have to wait for when they do it, and then we dust off the well-used plans. We including trotting the well-trod-upon path to the UN to try to get an additional resolution and sanctions from the Security Council. And then we initiate military actions of strategic asset deployment, increased exercises. We will likely take out of the drawer the target folders for additional sanctions that we should be implementing today, but we're holding them off in response to some North Korean provocation. So unfortunately, we've been through this drill many, many times before. There's no magic solution for getting them to not do these actions. So we just have to go through the motions, as it were. But they're all very important diplomatic and law enforcement and military measures that we need to take.
The State Department said the U.S. doesn't believe that the complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula will take place in one fell swoop. Instead, the department said it will be a process where both sides will be in the position to take incremental steps towards the goal. But simply, the North Korean regime hasn't been willing to do so. Mr. Rapson, Mr. Klingner, thank you so much for your time today.
Well, thank you for having us.
And that does it for this week's Washington Talk from Voice of America. Please join us again next week for more analysis.